Hello and welcome to Hey Ask Me Stuff, the show where you out there in the internet lands get to ask me stuff. My name is Ken Coughlin. I'm a Christian apologist coming at you live from Trinity Lutheran Church and School in Joppa, Maryland. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Let me give you a real quick introduction and then we'll dive into what the show is all about. If this is your first time watching, welcome. Here's what we do here. This show is entirely viewer driven, so I come on 6:30 p.m. Tuesday evenings, just about every Tuesday night, Eastern Time, here on the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel, and I answer a question that has been submitted by someone out there in the audience somewhere. And we take questions of any type. They can be questions about, Bible difficulties that you have, or a question about the life of Jesus, or the existence of God, or some challenge you heard recently from some atheist, or world religions. Maybe you have a question about some other world religion out there. Pretty much anything that is about the Christian faith or Christian faith adjacent. How about we say that? You submit them and we answer them. And here's how you get your questions on a future episode. Go to this website right here, trinityjoppa.org/askmestuff. And on that page, you will find a form that you can fill out. Fill out that form with your question. You can put your name. You don't have to. It can be completely anonymous. And then every week we go through there and we pick out an interesting question to talk about on this week's episode. So hopefully, if you have a question that's pressing on your heart, you will do that sometime soon. Speaking of that, we actually have been doing a 3-week series because several people had asked me a question that really took more than one episode to answer, but this is the last week. So starting next week, we're going to be going back to our usual format of answering one question every week. So now is the time to get your questions in. Please go ahead and do so. Also, something else I'd like to make sure I'd let everybody know about at the top of every episode here is this free resource if you want to use it. This is a website called kencoughlin.org. Please note, Coughlin is with an A-N. A lot of people see, usually it's spelled I-N, but I dare to be different. So kencoughlin.org. This is a website that has everything that I've pretty much been able to dig up that I've put out since about 2008 onward. And so it's got articles, podcasts, videos, short form videos, long form videos, classes, Bible studies, everything like that. Blogs, etc. And it's all topically arranged, so you can look under the apologetics heading, and you go down all these different topics, and of course you get to the existence of God, and there's so many arguments for the existence of God. They have their own little subheading there too. Bible studies, book reviews, Christian living, blah, blah, blah. So any questions that you have, take a look here, free resource. Maybe I can help you out even when we're not here joining together at Tuesday nights at 6:30 p.m. Also, there's information here about me, know a little bit about my background, or if you want me to come speak somewhere, there's information on how you can invite me or just contact me with any other questions. Also want to mention, I haven't said this the last few weeks, but depending on what your social media platform of choice is, I'm on just about all of them. And you can see if you scroll down to the bottom, you've got links down here to all the different social media platforms and, of course, email where you can email me. I am on YouTube, although I will tell you this YouTube channel is really more of just a clearinghouse for where I kind of collect videos from other channels. I don't post a lot of original YouTube content to this channel because most of what I do for other folks. The videos, obviously, like right now, we're on the Trinity Joppa channel. So most of the videos you'll see here are actually just links to the Trinity Joppa videos on the Trinity Joppa channel. I've got some others, like there's book reviews. These are all on the Lutheran Core Voices channel. But everything's collected here. Of course, it's collected topically in on the website as well. But there are a few videos here that are on the YouTube channel that aren't on the website. Like we had this old show, Ben Lander and I, now Pastor Ben Lander and I, had an old episode called Trinity Talk Live, which is really more of a current event show. And so not a lot of this. I think some of the episodes I put on the website, but not a whole lot. So if you're interested in any of those are on there. Cute little interview I did with I don't think I put this on the website. Maybe I should. This is a cute little interview we did with Sarah Garner making me eat progressively hotter hot wings as I answered the questions. But then, of course, on Facebook, I do have a professional Facebook page, on X or Twitter, however you want to call it, and then, of course, Instagram as well. So again, at the bottom of the website, you can find links to all of that if you want to follow me on any of those social media platforms as well. So anyway, let's get on with what our topic of the week is. So I did mention earlier that, one other thing I forgot to mention, sorry, is that we are at, what did I say? I try to give an update every week. We're trying to get the 2,500 subscribers before June 30th. And as of right this instant, we are at 2,216. So thank you to very, very much everybody who has subscribed. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. Click that notification bell. You don't want to miss any of the great content we have here on the Trinity Joppa channel. Help us reach our goal. We'd really appreciate it. If you have subscribed, share the channel with your friends. Tell your friends about it. Post on some of those social media platforms. You can share it there and ask people to subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. All right, so I mentioned earlier that for the past few weeks, we've been answering, well, it's really one broad question, but it was asked to me in a few different ways by a few different people. People just want to know about the end times, about what the Bible teaches about how the world's going to end and the final judgments and all of that. And so realizing that that was far too much to bite off in one particular week, I said, look, this is going to have to be a 3-week series where we're going to walk through, like the first week I talked about the differences between covenant theology and dispensationalism, and we talked about different views on the millennium, the 1,000-year millennium. And then last week we went into some 4 different ways folks view the prophecy in the book of Revelation. We talked about preterism and futurism and historicism and idealism. And then we went into what, frankly, most people probably think of when they think about talks about the end times, the tribulation, and the rapture. So if you're tuning in this week to hear about that, sorry, we already covered that. That's last week's episode, but it's still available on the YouTube channel. You can still watch it. But hey, wait till this one's over. Watch this one. We got a good one tonight, all right? Then go back and watch that one. And so tonight, what that leaves us with, and I want to talk about, is final states. Final states basically meaning, what is the final state of the righteous? What is the final state of the wicked? Or, as you probably would more commonly think of it, what's heaven and what's hell? And I do, before we launch too deeply into this conversation, I do want to make sure I make one thing very clear, and I might revisit this sometimes throughout the night. Lots of times you'll hear this referred to, like I just did, what the final state of the righteous and the final state of the wicked. But I want to make sure we're clear that nothing I'm saying here overrides the gospel message, right? And that is, left to our own devices, we all fall in the wicked category, all right? Everyone's sinner, all right? No one does good, no, not one. And when I say the final state of the righteous, what we're talking about is those people who, through God's grace, God has declared righteous. Initially, he declares them righteous through the blood of Jesus, through faith in Jesus. And then after declaring them righteous, then he actually starts the progress through something called sanctification, of working to actually make them righteous, something that is completed in heaven, which we'll talk a little bit about tonight. So when I'm talking about, the righteous versus the wicked, don't hear that to mean people who have pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and lived a good life, and they've been the righteous ones, and everybody else, boo, wicked people. No. All right, understand. But for the grace of God, there go I. Heard that expression? Yeah, there's a reason for that. We're all wicked. And it's just through God's grace that through faith we can be declared righteous and then become righteous gradually through the process of sanctification. So anyway, with that one caveat, I want to get into our conversation for tonight. And I'm going to start out by talking about heaven. All right, and I'm going to talk about what the nature of heaven is, let's see, I'm looking through my notes here, and then talk a little bit about what our lives are going to be like in heaven, and then a few common questions that people have about heaven. And then once we go through those 3, then I'll kind of turn my attention to hell, and, well, I'll give you a summary of that when we get there. But we'll start with heaven, then we'll move on to talking about hell. So the first thing I want to talk about is, what is the nature of heaven? First point of confusion that we need to clear up is that in the Bible, the word heaven is used in a few different ways. And oh, by the way, we're launching into this, if you have any questions, comments, you're watching us live, then you can put your question or comment in the live chat here on the YouTube channel, and I will see it pop up here on my screen, and we can actually interact. So if you have a question for me as we go along, ask it, and then I can hopefully try to answer it as we go through here. If you are not watching us live, then I'd still love to hear from you and what you think, and any questions you may have, put them in the comments section after the fact. Love for that. All right, getting back to what I was saying here. So there are three ways the word heaven is commonly used in the Bible. The first way you see that word heaven used is cosmological, all right? In other words, phrases like heaven and earth or heavens and earth, things like that. This is literally referring to the cosmos, all right, the space above us. And we see this, of course, in Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, all right? A second way that the Bible uses the word heaven is almost like a synonym for God, all right? And some examples here, Luke 15:18. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. That's kind of saying the same thing twice because it's just a poetic way of doing that, because you don't sin against the cosmos, the stars, right? You don't sin against a place. You sin against a person, right? You owe moral duties to a person. So that's what we see there. Also, Matthew 21:25, Jesus talking says, John's baptism, where did it come from? Was it from heaven or of human origin? Well, what does that mean, from heaven? That means, was it of God, right? Was it of God or was it of human origin? Was it God's origin or human origin? So sometimes the word heaven is used almost like a synonym for God. Matthew did this a good amount. He would use phrases like kingdom of heaven instead of kingdom of God. And the reason for that is Matthew was writing primarily to a Jewish audience, all right? And even many Jews to this day, because they're very cautious about the second commandment, or in some Christian traditions, the third commandment. We number them differently, right? About using the Lord's name in vain, not using the Lord's name in vain. As to be ultra cautious about that, many Jews at the time and today wouldn't even say Yahweh. All right? They wouldn't even say the name of God. They wouldn't write the name of God. They wouldn't say God. You'll see some today that will, instead of writing even the word God out, G-O-D, it'll say like G-D, all right? Because they really don't want to, they don't want to risk running afoul of that commandment. Matthew was aware of this. And so lots of times he would substitute the word heaven for God because he was writing to a Jewish audience, but he was still referring to God. So it can be a synonym that way. And then, of course, the third way that heaven is used is talking about the abode of God, where God is, right? We see this in John 3:13. No one has ever gone into heaven except the one who came from heaven, the Son of Man, clearly describing a place, right? And I got another one on here, Matthew 28:2. There was a violent earthquake, this is talking at the resurrection, right? For an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. So of these three senses of the word heaven, it's that third one that I'm talking about tonight. What is heaven as the abode of God? I'm not going to be, this isn't a lesson about, it's not a cosmology lesson here. What about the stars? What about the planets? All that. That's not tonight. And we're not talking about the theology of God tonight. The second use is a synonym of God. Great class to have. We talk about the nature of the Trinity. I've done that a million times before, but that's not tonight. All right. So we're talking about heaven as the abode of God. All right. So the next question that comes up is, well, what is heaven? What is heaven? What is the nature of heaven? And there's a couple different ways to answer this, but I think the primary and most important thing to understand about heaven is that first and foremost, it is the presence of God. It is being in the presence of God. Revelation 21, 1 through 3. Remember last week we were talking about all the earlier chapters of Revelation leading up to this point, and the tribulation period and the return of the second coming of Jesus Christ. And now we're moving on to the next part of Revelation where we get to see what heaven's going to be like. And in Revelation 21, it says this, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God.'" All right. So right there, God's dwelling place will be among the people, and he will dwell with them. I want to show you a neat quote. This is from Millard Erickson. He was the author of one of the, I'm going to quote him a couple times tonight, author of one of the systematic theology books I've got on my shelf back at home. And he says this: "God's intention from the beginning to have fellowship with humans led first to his creating the human race, then to his dwelling in the tabernacle and temple, then to his coming in the incarnation, Jesus, right? And finally to his taking humans to be with him." That's what heaven is, all right? So first and foremost, heaven is living, being in the presence of God, all right? More than that, let's dive a little bit deeper. What else could we say about heaven? Well, we could say that for the first time, when we're in heaven, we're going to have perfect knowledge of God. And what I mean by that is we're going to see him and know him in a direct way because we're in his presence. All right. So we're going to see him and know him far more directly than we can now, than we can currently. We got 1 Corinthians 13, 9 through 12. "For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection, as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known." So there's going to be a more direct knowledge of God because we will literally be in his presence for all eternity. All right. What else can we say about heaven? Well, this one you probably knew was coming. "All evils will be removed. There will be no more evil." Revelation 21:4, "He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." All right. And this makes sense. I mean, in addition to God just promising us there's not going to be any more evil, there's not going to be pain, there's not going to be crying, Satan, the number one tempter of tempters, right, of sin, ain't going to be there anymore. Revelation 20:10, "And the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet had been thrown. They'll be tormented day and night forever and ever." So Satan's gone. He's out of the picture at this point. And so there's not going to be satanic temptation and satanic evil anymore at that point in time. All right. And the last thing I'm going to mention about what heaven is going to be like is it's going to be glorious. It is going to be glorious, which makes sense when you think about the fact that glory is a defining factor of God. And God's going to be there, right? God's going to be there. Matthew 25:31, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne." All right. Revelation 21:23, talking about this new heaven and new earth. "The city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light, and the Lamb is its lamp." So I don't think, I mean, if you look at the book of Revelation, Paul Paul, I'm sorry, my computer logged out here, so I'm logging back in again. John uses lots of language about streets lined with gold and jewels and all this, and I don't think that's necessarily meant to be literal. I think what he's conveying there is the same thing these verses are conveying, and that is that it's almost hard to describe with our human language how glorious it is to be in the presence of God, all right? But that's what it is. That's what heaven is. So you can see these other things. That's why I say first and foremost, it's being in the presence of God, because kind of everything else I talked about is a result of that. It's a consequence of being in the presence of God, the logical outworkings of being in the presence of God. All right. So another question that gets asked a lot about heaven is, or I should say another misconception is, what is our life in heaven going to be like? Because let's face it, there's a view, I guess you could say, where people say, hey, look, they picture heaven as, hanging around on clouds all day playing harps. That's what heaven is going to be like. No. And the Bible, while not giving us total knowledge, of course, it does give us some insight into what our existence in heaven is going to be like. And again, if it were defined by, just like the definition of heaven was defined first and foremost by being the presence of God, if I were to use one word to describe primarily what our existence in heaven will be like, it is rest, right? It's rest. It's what the Sabbath's pointing to, all of this. And then we get Hebrews 4, 9 through 11. There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters rest also rests from their works, just as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one will perish by following their example of disobedience. All right. First and foremost, it's about rest. And the way I want you to picture this rest is I want you to imagine the feeling you get when you have a goal and you have set out to achieve that goal. And then you achieve it. It's a big goal, right? And then you achieve it. Anybody else ever do this? I do this a lot. And this is, my wife, I think, thinks I'm weird about like this, but I do it. If I'm working on a project, all right, maybe I'm making a new flower bed, or like this past Sunday after church, Saturday, I don't know. This past weekend, I was trimming some bushes. We got some Rose of Sharon bushes around the side of the house that they always get so overgrown, they get so tall, they start drooping over. And then when I come by with a lawnmower, they smack me in the head. So every few years, I got to trim them back, and I trim them way back. It's a major project to thin these things out and trim them down. Well, when I finish something like that, I always kind of take a moment at the end, right? And just sit there and I look at it, and I just take it in. I just take it in. There's a feeling of rest. There's a feeling of contentment when you realize I've been laboring for something for so long, and then there it is, and I've achieved it. Now, I want you to take that feeling, those of you that know what I'm talking about, and I want you to multiply that a bazillion fold. I know a bazillion is not a real number, but you get my point, right? Because as we'll talk about here in a little bit, there's a big difference, several differences between that feeling and the feeling of heavenly rest. But it's a similar feeling. That's what I'm trying to get that through. Because even with that feeling, when I finish trimming those Rose of Sharon bushes, there's still another project to be done, right? There's always something else to move on to, whereas in heaven, there's not. It's achieved. It's done. And it's also not a matter of our effort. Getting into heaven is not a matter of our effort. It's a matter of God's grace and what he did for us. But that feeling of rest is what I want you to focus on. And that is probably the number one defining nature of heaven. It's just resting. What else will heaven be like? Well, this should also not be a huge surprise. Worship. All right. Another fundamental aspect of heaven is worshiping God. We see an example of this in Revelation 19, verses 6 through 8. Then I heard what sounded like a great multitude, like the roar of rushing waters and like loud peals of thunder, shouting, "Hallelujah, for our Lord God Almighty reigns. Let us rejoice and be glad and give him glory. For the wedding of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. Fine linen, bright and clean, was given her to wear. Fine linen stands for the righteous acts of God's holy people. So what we see here is an example, kind of a glimpse that John got in the revelation that was given to him of what's happening in heaven. He's getting to peek through the door, so to speak. And what did he see is happening? Worship. People are praising God left and right. And when I see this, it also makes me think of a partial response to a common rejoinder, a common objection that I hear from skeptics sometimes about why can't everyone go to heaven? And I think there's a lot of Christians that ask this question. Well, why can't just everyone go to heaven? There's a belief that everyone should just go to heaven and God should just let everybody in. If you understand that worship of God is part and parcel of what it means to be in heaven, and you have no desire to worship God, you going to want to be in heaven? I mean, you're going to fit it? I mean, is that really, they're contradictory. People who have no interest in worshiping God and bowing their knee to God are not going to have that same rest that we do in heaven. Why not? They're going to hate it. They would hate it. It would be torture for them because they're sitting around they have to worship God all day, a God that they have no interest in worshiping. All right, so that's one of the reasons you understand why, not everybody's going to be in heaven, because some people just don't want to worship God, and God's not going to make them. He's not going to force them to do that. So that is item number 2. So number 1 was rest. Number 2 was worship. And number 3 is service. This one's a little, more unclear, or not as clear, I should say, in the scriptures as some of the others are. What I've got here is more of an example. Matthew 19:28, Jesus said to them, "Truly I tell you, at the renewal of all things, when the Son of Man sits on his glorious throne," which we just saw is, this is heaven it's talking about, "you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel." So here's Jesus talking to his disciples, saying, when you get to heaven, there's judging that you're going to be doing. All right, well, who's the judge? Jesus is the judge. So this is service to Jesus, kind of delegated authority that's being given to them. And again, another quote here from Millard Erickson on this passage, or this idea of judging, of service in heaven, said it is not clear just what is involved in this judging, but apparently it is service or work done on behalf of the king. There may well be a parallel here to the dominion the humans were originally intended to exercise in the Garden of Eden. They were to serve as underlords or vice regents, carrying out God's work on his behalf. And so, well, that doesn't mean we're all going to be judges. It doesn't say that. It is something I think we should be prepared for and expect, that there will be some aspect of service, of us serving God in heaven. All right? What that is specifically, we don't know. But there's going to be some level of service. And last but not least, or at least last but not least that I'm going to talk about here tonight on our lives in heaven, is fellowship. Heaven will be a place of fellowship. Hebrews 12, verses 22 through 24, "But you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. You have come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly, to the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God, the judge of all, to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel." There's going to be so much going on in heaven. So many people, angels, Jesus, the Son, the Father, the Holy Spirit, all in heaven. and we're all going to get to enjoy fellowship with each other. So there is, for lack of a better word, the church's best spaghetti dinner ever is going to be in heaven. That's what we do for fellowship right now. We just throw spaghetti dinners. So that's what heaven is going to be like, and that's what our lives are going to be like in heaven. I want to close the section on heaven here, just answering a few questions that I think people commonly ask about heaven. One is heaven a place or a state? What do I mean by that? Well, remember I said the most fundamental defining characteristic of heaven is being in the presence of God. Well, that's more like a state, isn't it? It's a state of being. What I mean, not like a state like Montana, but a state of being. You're being in the presence of God. Well, if God's here, then heaven's here. If God's here, then heaven's here. If God's here, then heaven's here. But there are also passages, like I have here in the passage of Philippians, that tend to also indicate that there is going to be a physical reality in heaven. For example, what we see here, Philippians 3:20 through 21, but our citizenship is in heaven, and we eagerly await a Savior from there, the Lord Jesus Christ. So again, we see Jesus is coming from a place, right? Who, by the power that enables him to bring everything under his control, will transform our lowly bodies so that they will be like his glorious body. All right? So Scripture speaks here of us having some kind of new, perfected body, which does suggest a physical reality of some sort. So the answer to the question, is heaven a place or a state? The answer is yes, or both. It's both, all right? It can be seen as both. All right, the second question, and I don't know if you've pondered this one or not, but I found this to be a very good question first time I heard somebody ask it, and that is, how can we be satisfied if we're not continuing to grow? Here on earth, you think about it, we find drive, we find purpose, we find satisfaction by continuing to develop, right? Continuing to have something to strive for, to push forward for, and achieving new goals. Kind of like that example I gave earlier about, cutting my Rose of Sharon bushes on the side of the house. Again, another quote here from Millard Erickson, who explains why he thinks this is not an issue in heaven. Frustration and boredom occur within this life whenever development is arrested at a finite point, meaning stopped, all right? Stopping short of perfection. If, however, one were to fully achieve, if there were no feeling of inadequacy or incompleteness, there would probably be no frustration. The stable situation is not a fixed state short of one's goal, but a state of completion beyond which there can be no advance. All right. In other words, the objection here, what gets at its core, it's like if we're not developing anymore in heaven, then that's going to lead to us being bored or frustrated. But that's assuming that there's something more for us to achieve that's leading to our frustration, because we're stagnant. We're not able to work towards this goal that we want to keep working for. But understand, that's not the case in heaven. There's no higher goal to achieve, right? You're there. You're in the presence of God. So you're not looking onward to, oh man, if only I could get there. There is no there. You already are there, all right? There's no further better thing beyond where you are to look toward. And so for that reason, there's no feeling of frustration, of boredom, of complacency, or just dissatisfaction. Now, again, I want to throw in the same caveat I gave at the very beginning, which is, remember when I say that you've achieved that end goal and there's nothing further beyond to look, you haven't achieved it, right? God achieved it for you. It was God's grace. But either way, you're still there. You still end up in that place. So there's nothing more to strive for, all right? There's nothing more to desire, to push for. You've got it all already. All right. And the third question that people sometimes ask about heaven is a tough one. Will we remember our past sins and unsaved loved ones when we're in heaven? And here we have to admit some level of ignorance. And what I mean by that is the Bible does not definitively and clearly answer this question. And we cannot and should not speak beyond what the Bible teaches us. Now, based on what the Bible does teach, there's some possible general conclusions we might be able to come to, maybe. Revelation 21:4, read this one before. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. So what this verse tells us is that if something would lead to us crying or mourning or feeling pain, then that is not a thing we are going to experience in heaven. So Millard Erickson, for example, and I tend to agree with him on this one, says that he does not think we will remember our past sins in heaven, because if you're remembering your past sins while you're there in the presence of God, it's hard to envision that not giving you some feelings of regret, right? And in which case there would be mourning, right? And so you probably won't remember your past sins. As far as your unsaved loved ones, I guess the question comes back to, will we in heaven be able to remember our unsaved loved ones in a way that will not lead to us crying or mourning or feeling pain? I don't know the answer to that. I get maybe God can do that and it can be possible. But that's about as far as I think we can take that one. All right. And the last question I want to answer, I guess you could say, about heaven, before we move on to our section about hell, is this one. Will there be varying levels of rewards in heaven? Well, what I've got on the screen, and I'll read for you quickly here, is what's called the parable of the 10 minas, or I used to pronounce it the 10 minas. I don't know which one's correct, but lately I've heard more people saying mina, so I'm going to say mina. But funny, if you go to that website, kencoffin.org, and you find some of the oldest resources on there from like 2008 or so, you'll hear some podcasts that actually say this is a product of 10 Minas Ministries or whatever. My original apologetics ministry that I started up in the early 2000s was named after this parable, and it was called 10 Minas Ministries, is what I referred to it as at the time. But mina, mina, potato, whatever. The lesson's the same. Luke 19:11 through 27. While they were listening to this, he went on to tell them a parable, because he was near Jerusalem, and the people thought that the kingdom of God was going to appear at once. He said, a man of noble birth went to a distant country to have himself appointed king, and then to return. So he called 10 of his servants, and gave them 10 minas. Put this money to work, he said, until I come back. But his subjects hated him and sent a delegation after him to say, we don't want this man to be our king. He was made king, however, and returned home. Then he sent for the servants to whom he had given the money, in order to find out what they had gained with it. The first one came and said, sir, your mina has earned 10 more. Well done, my good servant, his master replied. Because you have been trustworthy in a very small matter, take charge of 10 cities. The second came and said, sir, your mina has earned 5 more. His master answered, you take charge of 5 cities. Then another servant came and said, sir, here is your mina. I have kept it laid away in a piece of cloth. I was afraid of you because you are a hard man. You take out what you did not put in and reap what you did not sow. His master replied, I will judge you by your own words, you wicked servant. You knew, did you, that I am a hard man, taking out what I did not put in and reaping what I did not sow? Why then didn't you put my money on deposit so that when I came back, I could have collected it with interest? Then he said to those standing by, take his mina away from him and give it to the one who has 10 minas. Sir, they said, he already has 10. He replied, I tell you, that to everyone who has, more will be given. But as for the one who has nothing, even what they have will be taken away. But those enemies of mine who did not want me to be king over them, bring them here and kill them in front of me. So understand that this is not talking about salvation. This is not going out and earning your way to salvation. All right. What it's referring to is our duty, our obligation to take the gifts that God has given us and to use them, right? To put them to use while he is away, while he's ruling from heaven in this period of time. And we see as a result, what he does is Jesus indicates that certain servants got greater rewards than other servants did. And so this at least seems to indicate that, yes, there will be varying degrees of reward in heaven. But then that gets us back to that Revelation passage about, well, there'll be no sorrow, no mourning. Well, if I'm sitting in heaven, right, and I see someone else who did more with what was given to them in life than I did, and so they've got more benefits, and I can see those benefits right there, wouldn't that lead to me mourning? Wouldn't that lead to me having some level of regret? Not necessarily. And again, this is where I go back to Millard Erickson, who I've quoted a number of times tonight. I kind of like his solution to this, where he says, what if these rewards in heaven, it's not a matter of physical, visible differences in rewards, as much as the level of our subjective appreciation for those rewards. So we're all getting the same thing. We're all getting our own mansions, whatever, as it describes it. You're all getting the same thing. You're all getting to be in the presence of God. But some of us are going to feel more about those rewards than others will. We're all going to appreciate them, right? We're all going to have this internal appreciation. But for some people, that internal appreciation will be even greater. But here's the thing. I can't tell by looking at you what your level of appreciation is, right? So I don't know what I'm missing out on, so to speak. So I'm never going to be in a position to regret, to think about, oh, I'm only feeling this, but they're feeling that. I don't know what they're feeling. It's their feelings. That's the point. And if we were to compare notes, both of us would be describing how wonderful we feel, right? And so that's one way. I kind of like Millard Erickson's way of looking at it. But again, that's a possibility. It's not something we should be dogmatic about because the Bible doesn't explicitly say that. But it does seem to give some indication that there will be some levels, differing levels of rewards in heaven. All right. That's our conversation about heaven. Now we're going to turn the other side of the coin and talk about hell. And we're going to start out with kind of the same question we asked about heaven. What is the nature of hell? All right. If the fundamental core nature of heaven is being in the presence of God, then the fundamental core nature of hell is not being in the presence of God. Now, what that means exactly and how that plays out is somewhat of a mystery. That's hard for us to wrap our minds around. I know a lot of Christians have issues with this because they say, well, God is omnipresent. He's everywhere. How could there be a place that he's not present? And again, we're thinking, maybe it's more of that getting to what I was just saying about the internal appreciation of the different rewards in heaven. Maybe it's more of an internal presence that God is denying these people. But we see it right here in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 9. They will be punished with everlasting destruction and shut out from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his might. Remember, we said glory is part and parcel of heaven. That's part of the nature of heaven because God is glorious and it's God's abode. You're being shut out from God's presence. You're being shut out from that glory. All right. Another question that frankly probably hits home with a lot of, obviously Eastern religions, but even common in our culture here in America today, is hell final? Or another way of putting it is, can I have a second chance? Nope. All right. Matthew 25:41. Then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. It is described as eternal. There is nothing, let's make this abundantly clear, there is nothing in the Bible, anywhere in Scripture, that gives any indication that people after the day of judgment will have a second chance. You want your second chance, you're getting it now. That's what this life is all about. It's a life of second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and 77th chances, all right? But once that judgment comes, when God decides in his wisdom it should come, then that's it. There are no more second chances, which is why it makes the Great Commission so important for us today. And this ties into the next question of, is hell eternal? Well, you'll notice the question at the top of the screen changed. The Bible verse didn't, right? Matthew 25:41 says point blank, hell is eternal. It is never ending. It is forever. Now, there are some groups of Christians that I think try to soft pedal this somewhat by something called annihilationism, which is the view that you're in hell for a certain period of time and then you just cease to exist. I will get to that, put a pin in that. We're going to come back to that before the end of the night, but not just yet. Another related question to what we asked in regard to heaven, we said, are there degrees of rewards in heaven? I said, yeah, probably. Are there degrees of punishment in hell? All right, and here we have a passage from Matthew chapter 11, verses 21 through 24. This is Jesus talking. Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the miracles that were performed in you had been performed in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I tell you, here's the key, it will be more bearable for Tyre and Sidon on the day of judgment than for you. And you, Capernaum, will you be lifted to the heavens? No, you will go down to Hades. For if the miracles that were performed in you had been performed in Sodom, it would have remained to this day. But I tell you that it will be more bearable for Sodom on the day of judgment than for you. It will be more bearable. Well, if it will be more bearable, that tends to indicate that for some people, their experience will be more bearable, and other people, their experience will be less bearable, right? So again, that does seem to suggest that there will be differing levels of punishment, or the experience of punishment, if we follow that parallel that I talked about with heaven, for those that are in hell. All right, let's see. Next one. And this is the question that I'm going to be spending the rest of this podcast on. And the annihilationism question I mentioned is kind of going to be a subset of this. We'll get to it in a second. But this is one that is asked and I think bothers a lot of people, both skeptics and Christians alike. It is one that I have written a book that I'm still working on getting published, which is, by the way, if you haven't subscribed or followed me on any of those social media platforms, I got to be honest, this is the reason I'm asking. Because publishers tend to want to know what kind of platform you have to help sell a book. I'm not excusing it. I'm not saying it's right. It is what it is. It's one of the things I got to tell them when I submit the manuscript. And so I am trying to build up those other social media platforms so I can say, yeah, people are actually interested in my stuff, Anyway, but I wrote a whole chapter in the book that hopefully will be coming out sometime soon on this question. Why would a loving God send people to hell? If hell is eternal and it's torment and it's so bad, why on earth would a loving God ever send anyone there? All right. Well, we're going to take this bit by bit. The first thing I want to mention is it's correct a misunderstanding about the nature of hell. And what you see on the screen here are actually from my criminal justice background. For those of you that don't know, not only am I a lawyer, but I was a criminal justice major in undergrad. Actually did some graduate level studies in criminal justice at the master's level at Old Dominion University in the early 2000s. Did not finish my degree there because, well, this is before the era of online education. There was no such thing as finishing a degree online back then. And we ended up having a daughter, and then we ended up moving up here to Maryland to help take care of my in-laws. So I never got to finish my degree, but I did some graduate level studies in criminal justice. And what you see on the screen are 4 theories of the purpose of punishment in a criminal justice setting and beyond criminal justice, in a justice setting, I should say. One is deterrence, and the idea behind deterrence is the theory behind deterrence would be that we punish people in order to prevent either them or others from committing future crimes. So if I punish you, you commit a crime and I punish you, you're less likely to commit a crime again. If you commit a crime and I punish you, people who see me punish you may also be less likely to commit crimes. So it's future looking, all right? There's also the goal of incapacitation, and the incapacitation theory says the goal of punishment is to take people off the streets. Just remove their opportunity to commit more crimes, more offenses. The third view of the proper role of punishment is retribution, justice, all right, which is the punishment fits the crime, right? When a crime is committed, it's almost like a debt is owed, a debt to society, whatever. But there is a debt owed as a result of this crime that was committed. A punishment is therefore deserved because you committed this crime. It's a matter of deserts. You committed a crime, you deserve punishment. In other words, even if I knew that you would never be deterred, that no matter what punishment I inflicted upon you, you would still return to crime. You would still deserve punishment. I wouldn't on that ground say, all right, then you get to walk free because punishment serves no purpose. No, retribution says you still deserve it by nature of having committed the crime. And the last one is rehabilitation, which is the theory, again, that you can rehabilitate people, you can enact punishments that will make them see the error of their ways and correct their ways. All right, so those are the 4 major theories of punishment in the criminal justice system. The problem with most atheists that I talk to about this issue of hell, or people who raise this question in general, about why would a loving God send people to hell, is because they're misunderstanding the purpose of hell. Looking at these 4 justifications for punishment, they speak of hell as if its primary purpose is deterrence. Let me make this abundantly clear. The purpose of hell is not deterrence. The purpose of hell is retribution. It's justice, all right? It's that theory that you committed a crime, therefore you deserve to be punished, regardless of whether you could ever be deterred from it. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. This is a quote from Daniel Dennett, one of the 4 horsemen of the atheistic apocalypse, so to speak. And you can see right here where he's getting this mixed up. Religion plays in its most important role in supporting morality, many think, by giving people an unbeatable reason to do good, the promise of an infinite reward in heaven, and, depending on tastes, the threat of an infinite punishment in hell if they don't. That's just wrong, folks. The idea there is that the purpose of hell is to threaten people into good behavior. Folks, we as Christians do not do good because we're afraid of hell. If that is your understanding, then you have a false understanding of the Christian faith, all right? We do good out of gratitude to God. Think of it like this. If you were drowning, all right, and you couldn't swim, and somebody from the shore threw you a life preserver or swam out and got you and rescued you, what would you do? Would you just get on the shore and walk away without saying anything to them? No, you'd be showing immense gratitude. They saved your life, right? You'd be bestowing all sorts of thank yous upon them, offering to buy them steak dinner at Texas Roadhouse. That's what you do for me, by the way. Or Old South Smokehouse in Cecil County. Those are my 2 go-tos. Texas Roadhouse for steak, Old South Smokehouse for all things barbecue. Anyway, just a saying. I don't think we're ever going to get in the position where I'm going to rescue you from drowning, though. But, just in case you're ever wondering. No, but seriously, of course you're going to have gratitude, and you're going to want to do something for them. Well, if you would do that for someone who just rescued you from drowning, how much more will you want to show your gratitude for someone who literally saved you from hell, saved you from that eternal destiny, all right? So that is the motivation to do good, not out of fear, but out of gratitude, out of thankfulness to God. But atheist skeptics who, like Mr. Dennett, often pitch hell as saying it's just for deterrence purposes, to deter people from future crimes or future sins, or to make them be good people. And that is not the purpose of hell. You need to have a proper understanding of hell in order to give an effective answer to the question about why people go there. All right. Next part of the answer about why God, a loving God, would send people to hell. God is just by nature. That just like we say God is love, yes, God is love. God is forgiving. These are all character attributes of God. You know what another one is? He's just. He's fair. All right? He is perfectly just. He is perfectly fair. And we see this here in Deuteronomy 32:4. He is the rock. His works are perfect, and all his ways are just. A faithful God who does no wrong, upright and just is he. And then again, Psalm 89:14. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Love and faithfulness go before you. God is just by nature. Would it be just if God knew someone committed a crime and never faced punishment for it here on earth, and if he just turned around and let him get away with it? Would that be justice? God has to punish sin because he is just, and that is what sin deserves. Hopefully you're starting to see how this ties into that retribution theory, and that is how we view hell. All right, next up. Let me get to my next slide here. Here we go. Number 3. The common question that I get asked is that, well, wait a minute. Okay, fine, Ken. I get it. God has to punish sin. Somebody's committed a crime. They deserve punishment. But here's my blockage, Ken. Here's my mental break on this, is that we all have a finite period of time, a finite amount of time on earth, right? We don't live forever, which means even if we're committing a sin every second of our lives, there's still an end point. There is a limited number of sins. It may be a huge number, but it's still a finite number of sins that we can commit here on earth. And yet, Ken, you're also telling me that hell is eternal. Hell lasts forever. How can it be just to punish someone eternally for a non-eternal number of sins? If each sin had a certain amount of punishment it deserves, then even if you add them all up, it should still be a finite amount of. Sounds like a pretty solid objection, doesn't it? Well, I want to answer this first by describing a way that I have seen it answered in the past that I'm not satisfied with. Probably actually one of the most common answers to this, that I'll explain why I'm not buying that explanation that a lot of Christians offer. And then I'll tell you what explanation I do buy and why I think this actually, it makes perfect sense for hell to be eternal. All right. The first answer that a lot of people give is based on position. And the second one, as you can see on the screen, will be based on what I call duties. Here's the position explanation, and this is from a theologian named Benjamin Skog, author of another one of those systematic theology books on my bookshelf. When an individual commits an assault against his or her neighbor, a certain punishment is deserved. However, when that same assault is carried out against the leader of a nation, the punishment is greater because the victim of the assault is greater in stature. And so the argument goes, following the same reasoning, committing offenses against our fellow humans may only warrant a finite punishment. But because God is so much higher in stature and God is infinite, that the sin against God is deserving of eternal punishment. And if that rings true to you, great. I'm glad that strengthens you. I got Siri going on my computer over here. Siri, go away. All right, whatever. But it doesn't convince me, in all honesty, and here's why. I don't agree with this analogy. He says, if you commit a crime against your neighbor, you get a certain level of punishment, but against the head of state, you get another sense of punishment. Folks, the way I look at it, we are all made in the image of God, and we all have equal value. I don't care if a murder is committed against a homeless person or against a United States senator. The punishment that is deserved should be the same. Because in God's eyes, those two people have the same value, the same inherent value. Now, again, I'm sympathetic to the argument because while everything I've said is true, yes, God does have higher value than us. Obviously, I get it. But I don't buy the analogy. I don't think that just because we have a difference in position, in difference in that necessarily means that the punishment that's doled out for the sin should be different necessarily. Maybe not. I just don't find it over the top convincing. What I do find convincing, however, is the duty argument. And maybe this is because of my background as a lawyer. Probably is. All right. But let me give you this example. Do I have a slide for this or not? I can't remember. Let me look here. No, I don't. So I'm a lawyer, right? So let's pretend that, and obviously I'm not in private practice anymore. I just represent Trinity. But for over 2 decades, I was a private practice attorney where I had clients come in off the street, make appointments, they come meet with me, they would retain me, and I'd represent them in various different legal proceedings. Now let's pretend, first of all, that I got my friend, I'll call him Drew. Why? Because I really do have a friend named Drew. He was best friend in high school. Probably not watching because I don't think he watches the show. But if you ever do, Drew, hey, how you doing? He's a police officer down in Florida now. But let's say Drew comes to me and he says, Ken, I want to tell you a secret, but don't tell anyone. And he confides in me and he tells me the secret. And then I turn around and I betray his trust and I reveal his secret to someone. Well, there's certainly going to be some consequences I'm going to face for that, aren't there? Drew might not speak to me ever again. Certainly not going to trust me with any of his secrets again. All right. There's going to be a loss in that relationship. Now, let's pretend that I have a client that comes in my professional capacity as an attorney and tells me something confidential. And then I turn around and reveal that to someone. Well, I'm still going to have the loss of that relationship, right? That person may very well not be my client anymore. They may fire me. But I could also face additional consequences. I could face discipline from the state bar. All right, I could lose my license to practice law or have it suspended or what have you. Why? Because in both examples, I owe a moral duty to these people, right? Where I owe a moral duty not to reveal a secret that was entrusted to me. But in the second example, I also owe a legal duty, another duty on top of the moral one that's imposed upon me by the law and carries with it additional consequences. So what we see is we have varying levels of duties that we can owe. And I argue that God, as our creator, as the ultimate judge, as the standard for all things good, he is literally the source of morality. Literally all of our moral duties stem from our ultimate moral duty to him. In other words, the reason we even owe a moral duty to our fellow human beings is because we first owe moral duties to God. He's the origin of it. For that reason, we owe higher moral duties to the origin of morality than we do to those who are subsets of that. All right? So we owe a greater duty to God. So because we owe a greater duty to God, then we could face additional consequences and would deserve additional consequences for violating our duties to God than we would violating our duty to people. All right? So on the basis of duties and owing a higher duty, I think it is possible to argue, hey, hell should be eternal because we're violating a higher duty to God than we are just to our duties to our fellow human being. That being said, I don't think you even need to go there. If that's all philosophical mumbo jumbo and just going right over your head, fine, don't worry about it. Because I think the answer to this question is even simpler. And that is, sin doesn't stop, folks. The eternality of sin. Let's take a look at how the Bible describes hell and the experience of people in hell. Matthew 8:12. But the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Remember that term. All right. Again, Matthew 13:49 through 50. This is how it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come and separate the wicked from the righteous and throw them into the blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. We see that term again. All right. Now, most people, I think, when they hear that term, gnashing of teeth, they think that it's a sign of pain, of torment, like you're gritting your teeth, in pain, enduring the pain. That is us imposing our 21st century understandings of words upon someone who wrote them 2,000 years ago. All right, that is not what that phrase means. But Ken, how do you know? Because it shows up elsewhere in the Bible. The phrase gnashing of teeth does not only appear when talking about the state of people in hell. We see it applied to people who are not in hell. And through context clues, we can look to see what it means when we're seeing how it's used in other situations. Here's one. Psalm 35, verses 15 through 16. But when I stumbled, they gathered in glee. Assailants gathered against me without my knowledge. They slandered me without ceasing. Like the ungodly, they maliciously mocked. They gnashed their teeth at me. Does this sound like it's describing someone who's in pain and torment? No, this is someone mocking someone else, right? Ridiculing someone else, making fun of someone else. All right, give you another example here. Acts chapter 7, verse 54. This is right after Stephen, before he gets stoned, right? Stephen has been called before the Sanhedrin, the Jewish council, and he has just given his Christian testimony. And in response, we see when the members of the Sanhedrin heard this, they were furious and gnashed their teeth at him. Gnashing of teeth has nothing to do with physical pain. Gnashing of teeth refers to being vehemently opposed to someone. All right? In the first example, we saw people were mocking and teasing. They were opposed to him. Second example, the Sanhedrin were so upset, so angry at Stephen for what he just said, that they were expressing that anger, opposition to him, by gnashing their teeth at him. That is what gnashing of teeth means, and that is what's going on in hell. So understand this. Someone may enter hell with a finite number of sins on their ledger, so to speak. And that is the case, right? But once they get there, they don't stop sinning. They blame God for their situation, not themselves. And so they are constantly angry at God, cursing God, blaspheming God over and over and over again. So they keep adding sins to their proverbial ledger. And so there is never a point where they have ever paid the just punishment for all of their sins, because they keep racking up the bill higher and higher and higher and higher eternally, the entire time they're there. That's why hell is eternal. Because people, when you say, why should people be punished for eternally for a finite number of sins? The answer is they're not. They're punished for an eternal number of sins, because you're assuming when you ask that question that people stop sinning when they get to hell. But they don't. They're still in existence. They keep on sinning. And so they keep racking up their punishment over and over and over again for eternally. That's why hell is eternal. All right. And let's see. The last question I'm going to answer this evening is the one I promised I was going to come back to. And that's this one. Why doesn't God just annihilate sinners? Remember I told you that some Christians are resistant to the idea that hell is eternal. And so what they will argue is that we get God needs to punish sin. So what we think hell is that they will get punished for a certain period of time, and then they're not going to get into heaven. They can't get into heaven, but they will just cease to exist. They'll be annihilated. All right. Now, there are different views of annihilationism. That's kind of the purest version. There are some people that just say, well, it's really more of a naturalist view, that we're all basically mortal, and so whether you're a believer or not, you cease to exist at death. Again, that's not really a Christian view. That's a naturalist view. There's others who say that, well, we're all born and we're all inherently mortal, but then what God does is, for those who are believers, he grants them immortality. So we're not immortal beings by nature. We don't become immortal until God gives us that. And so if he hasn't given you that, then at the end of your life, you just cease to exist. Neither one of those is a Christian view and consistent with the Christian theology, for the fundamental reason that neither one of those involves punishment for sin, right? That both of those, if you just cease to exist at death, then what about the sins you committed during life that went unpunished? They never got punished. So those are not viable options for a Christian. There are Christians who believe in the more pure form of annihilationism I described, but I think there's two problems with it. Number one, I think it's unreasonable. And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I mean that literally, just rationally speaking, if you think it through, there's a problem there. There's a logical problem there. And it stems back to what I said before of the fact that the gnashing of teeth, that people continue to sin in hell. Well, if people continue to sin in hell, then, and they keep racking up this proverbial debt, so to speak, then let me just ask you a very simple question. When exactly is the right time to annihilate them? When do you reach that point when they have paid the price for all their sins and can therefore be annihilated while God's justice is still satisfied? It never happens. You never get there because they're continuing to sin. They're continuing to gnash their teeth at God. And if they're continuing to gnash their teeth, they're continuing to sin, then they never reach a point where they have paid the penalty for all their sins and can therefore justly be annihilated. All right. So I think there's that logical issue with annihilationism right there. And the other problem I have with annihilationism is I do find it to be unbiblical. All right. In other words, I think there are plenty of passages in the Bible that contradict it. I mean, we've already seen some tonight that describe hell as being eternal, the fire of hell being eternal. A lot of scriptures describe people's punishment in hell as being never-ending. Isaiah 66:24 is another one. Mark 9:43 is one. I don't have those on the screens because the one I have on the screen I think is just absolutely definitive. There's no way of getting around this one, folks, in my mind. And that's Matthew 25:46. And this is part of the sheep and goats judgment, where Jesus is talking about the end times, right, separating the sheep on one side and the goats on the other. And he says this, then they will go away, meaning the goats, then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. That the word in Greek that is being used and translated here as eternal is the same in both times it is used in this verse. The exact same Greek word is used to say some will go to eternal punishment and others will go to eternal life. If the life is eternal, as I think we all agree it is, heaven is eternal, then the punishment, logically speaking, biblically speaking, must also be eternal. They are described literally the exact same way. To try to support annihilationism, you have to look at this verse and say that even though the exact same word is used to describe both states, that they mean different things. One is really eternal and one is not. And I don't think that can be biblically supported. All right, so what did we talk about tonight? We talked about the final state of the righteous and the final state of the wicked. Or as I mentioned at the top, we talked about heaven and hell. We said, what is the nature of heaven? We talked about some of the different ways that word is used, but we're talking about this as the dwelling place of God. And we talked about what heaven is like. And if you get nothing else out of this, understand, I said the primary defining feature of heaven is being in the presence of God. We talked a little bit about what our lives will be like in heaven. They'll be characterized by rest and by worship and by service and by fellowship. And then I answered some common questions about heaven, about, is it a place or a state? Well, it's both, right? Is heaven, can we be satisfied if we're not continuing to grow? And we said, yes, because there's nothing more to strive for, right? You're there. You're at the end goal. There's nothing more to be desiring. Will we remember our past sins and our past loved ones? We said the Bible doesn't really give a clear answer on that, but we can say that nothing that would give us sorrow is going to be present in heaven. Will there be varying level of rewards in heaven? We said, yeah, the Bible tends to indicate there will be. Then we looked at hell, the final state of the wicked. And we said, what is the nature of hell? Well, the nature of heaven is the presence of God. The fundamental nature of hell is not being in the presence of God. Is hell final? Yes. The Bible gives you no indication that there's a second chance after judgment. Is hell eternal? Yes. Again, all the scriptures describe it as being eternal, never ending, everlasting. Are there degrees of punishment? He said, yeah, it seems to indicate there are. Just like there are degrees of rewards in heaven, there are probably degrees of punishment in hell. And then we closed out by answering the question, why would a loving God send people to hell? And we said, because God is just, right? God is just. Sin has to be punished. As a matter of fact, I didn't give you the statistic earlier, but there's a group called Project Cold Case that did a study that showed that between 1980 and 2019, all right, so over this, 39-year period, there were 184,992 unsolved murders in the United States alone. Just shy of 200,000 murders. 200,000 people who got away with murder and never got punished in that 39-year period, just in this country. All right. If God is just, can he let that slide? No. It has to be punished. Sin has to be punished. And if you don't belong to Christ, and so that his payment is not applied to you, then you got to pay it yourself. All right. And that's what the purpose of hell is. We talked about retribution and being a retribution type of philosophy behind hell. So God has to punish nature, or punish sin, because he's just by nature. And then we also pointed out that people don't stop sinning in hell. That's why it's eternal, because they keep sinning over and over and over again. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps it up. I want to thank you very much for joining me here for these past 3 weeks where we have talked about the end times. Hopefully, I have answered all your questions over the course of these 3 weeks, or at least most of them. I mean, even this was a crash course. We could spend so much more time diving deeper into all of these things, especially last week's episode. I really had to kind of frame it just around the different seals and the trumpets and the bowl judgments and all that. To kind of work our way through the book of Revelation. But there's so much more we could have talked about those intervals in between the passages on the judgments. But hopefully you got something out of it. If you think of a question after the fact, you can put it in the comments section, or go to that website. Remember, I showed you at the bottom of the website, kencoughlin.org. There's a link there where you can send me an email. Shoot me an email. Let me know what your question is. I'm happy to try to answer it as best I can. All right. And again, just a reminder, if I can put this on here, there we go. If you have a question you'd like to see on a future episode, go to this website right here, trinityjoppa.org/askmestuff, fill out the online form, and we'd be happy to answer your question. Next week, we're getting back to the norm. I don't know what question we're going to answer yet. Frankly, I've been so laser focused on these 3 weeks answering questions about the end times that I haven't even looked to next week yet. So I will look through what's been submitted sometime over the course of next week. We'll pick a topic for next week's episode. But now's the time. Get your question on there. Would love to see what you have to say and help in any way that I can. All right. And again, if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Help us meet that goal, 2,500 subscribers by June 30th. Can't do it without you. Tell your friends, share, click the notification bell, all that YouTube stuff. All right. I'm done. It's late. I want to go home. So I will just thank you all again for joining us. Make sure you join us again next Tuesday, 6:30 p.m. Eastern, right here on the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel. See you then. God bless.